The stars had always seemed so peaceful. Out there, beyond the endless stretches of black, civilizations had flourished, warred, and died for millennia. The galaxy, vast and full of life, had its balance. Species came and went, but none ever truly threatened the status quo. No one ever thought a young, unremarkable planet like Earth would ever matter in the grand scheme of the universe. Humanity had been a curiosity to the rest of the galaxy. For decades, the aliens had watched with amusement as Earth's small, fragile ships ventured into space. At first, humanity's technological advancements had been slow, their space programs still in their infancy compared to the mighty empires that ruled the stars. There were no grand fleets, no godlike weapons, just a small, determined species trying to find its place among the stars. But it didn't take long before the humans were seen as a nuisance, a curious species with an abundance of potential but nothing to show for it. They were no threat to the Trium Collective, the Vorkari Dominion, or any of the ancient powers that held sway over the galaxy. And yet there was always something about humanity that was hard to ignore. They were relentless. They survived against all odds. They endured. While other species had risen and fallen in the blink of an eye, humanity had stood the test of time. Their determination was their strength, and the rest of the galaxy hadn't noticed. Until one day they did. It started with a message. A simple transmission, broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy, a voice that had once been humble but was now full of quiet rage. The voice came from the Earth's representative, Admiral Thomas Harrow. The humans had spent years building a military, a fleet, a defense system far beyond what the galaxy ever expected. They had kept it hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy, but the time for silence was over. Harrow's voice cut through the cold silence of space. To the galaxy, we have one thing to say: you've been warned, we've held back long enough, and now we are done playing fair. It was a declaration that shook the stars themselves. No one had expected this. For years, humanity had been passive, careful not to make waves, eager to prove their worth but unwilling to risk their fragile existence. But now, the gloves were off. The Vorkari were the first to react. They were a war-hungry species, aggressive and swift, with a history of conquest that stretched back for centuries. The Vorkari saw themselves as the galaxy's rightful rulers, the ones who should determine the fate of every star system they encountered. When they received the transmission, they laughed. The humans, they were nothing, a fleeting species with no real strength. They had their tiny military, sure, but it was nothing compared to the might of the Vorkari fleets. "We'll wipe them out in a day," one Vorkari general sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Let them have their little threats. It'll be the last mistake they ever make." The Vorkari made their move swiftly. They sent a fleet to Earth's colonies, intending to crush them before they could even comprehend the scope of their error. Their ships were massive, towering war machines capable of wiping out entire planets with a single strike. The humans, as far as the Vorkari were concerned, were nothing more than ants beneath their boots. But the Vorkari were about to learn the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated. They arrived at Earth's colony, New Eden, a beautiful world that humanity had just begun to settle. The Vorkari fleet appeared in the system with all the confidence of a predator stalking its prey. They thought they could take their time. They thought they could crush the humans, break their spirit, and then continue their expansion across the stars. But Earth had been ready. The warning had been more than just words, it had been a promise. Before the Vorkari fleet could even fully deploy, the first strike hit them with the force of a thunderstorm. A blinding flash of light erupted in the darkness of space as one of the Vorkari warships, the Calthar, was torn apart. The enemy fleet, once so confident in their victory, faltered for just a moment. And in that moment, humanity's warships appeared. They were sleek black ships, designed for one thing and one thing only: destruction. Human ships had been built with the technology of a species that had been pushed to the edge, a species that had survived wars, starvation, and oppression. Humanity didn't have the time to build fleets like the Trium or the Zenari. They didn't have the luxury of endless resources or untold years of power. They had been forced to innovate. The first Vigilance-class battlecruiser, a symbol of humanity's new strength, unleashed hell upon the Vorkari fleet. Railguns fired with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, tearing through the armor of their warships like paper. Plasma missiles streaked through the void, bursting upon impact, sending shockwaves that rattled the entire fleet. The Vorkari didn't understand what was happening. Their sensors went haywire, their communication systems scrambled. The technology they had taken for granted was useless. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Admiral Harrow stood tall, his face a mask of determination. He watched as the enemy ships fell apart, their once imposing lines of battle collapsing into chaos. "We've been holding back for too long," he muttered to himself, his hand steady on the control panel. "Now they'll know who we are." And then the order came: fire everything. The Vigilance unleashed a barrage of weapons, obliterating the remaining Vorkari warships. One by one, their ships were reduced to flaming wrecks. The few survivors fled in a panic, their fleet broken and shattered in mere hours. By the time the battle was over, the Vorkari were in retreat, their pride shattered. Earth had shown them a glimpse of what they had been holding back for years. The message had been sent. The galaxy would no longer see humanity as weak. They would no longer be dismissed as a young, unimportant species. Humanity had power, more power than anyone had expected, and it was a power they were not afraid to wield. The galaxy was on notice, and it was only just beginning to realize the full scope of humanity's wrath. For the first time in a long while, the stars felt colder. The universe, full of ancient empires, mighty warships, and powerful civilizations, suddenly felt small. The warning had been clear. Humanity was done playing fair, and now the galaxy would face the consequences. The galaxy had never been so silent. News of humanity's brutal victory over the Vorkari fleet spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of space in a matter of hours. For the first time in centuries, the great empires of the stars were caught off guard. Species that had long ruled the galaxy were scrambling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The humans, young, fragile, and once considered weak, had obliterated a race that was known for its brutal conquests. It wasn't just a battle one, it was a statement. The Triumph Collective, a race of ancient and towering giants who had ruled over vast swaths of space for eons, were the first to respond. They had never thought much of humanity, dismissing them as a fleeting experiment, a species with a lot of noise but no real bite. The Triumph had seen civilizations rise and fall, and they assumed Earth was no different. But now, after the Vorkari's humiliating defeat, the Triumph knew they had made a grave mistake. "We will not be so careless," High Command's leader, General Valdar, said to his council. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of centuries of authority. "The humans must be crushed before they become a true threat." The Triumph's response was swift and decisive. Their fleet, massive and imposing, set course for Earth. The plan was simple: destroy humanity's core colonies, obliterate their forces, and show the galaxy that the Triumph were the true rulers of the stars. Earth's warning had been nothing more than a fluke they would correct in no time. As the Triumph fleet crossed the vast distance to Earth's space, their warships bristled with weapons and power. The Triumph had no fear. After all, they were the oldest and most powerful empire in the galaxy. Their ships were crafted from the strongest metals, and their weapons could shatter planets. They believed the humans had only been lucky, that their victory over the Vorkari was nothing more than a coincidence. But as the Triumph fleet entered the Sol system, something was wrong. At first, it was small things: the odd static in the communications lines, the sense of being watched. Then came the unmistakable sign that something was terribly wrong. The human fleet, the same fleet that had decimated the Vorkari, was waiting. The Triumph warships were massive, larger than most cities, their hulls covered in dark plating and glistening with the promise of destruction. But the human fleet, though smaller, was fast, sleek, and ready for war. There were only a few dozen ships, but each one carried the power of hundreds. Every ship was a masterpiece of destruction, built not with grandiosity but with deadly efficiency. The humans had created weapons that bent the laws of physics itself, and the Triumph had no idea what they were about to face. In the center of the human fleet stood the Dominion, a massive warship that could change the course of battles in an instant. It was the pride of Earth's military, a ship that had been in development for years. Now it would be humanity's shield and sword. Admiral Harrow, the same voice that had warned the galaxy, stood on its bridge, his gaze fixed on the Triumph fleet that loomed ahead. "Prepare for engagement," Harrow said, his voice steady. "We're not here to negotiate, we're here to finish this." The Triumph fleet, once so confident, faltered. Their sensors, unable to comprehend the sheer size and power of the human ships, began to blink and glitch. They'd never faced an opponent like this, never a species that could build such destructive weapons in such a short time. The first strike came without warning. A beam of light, bright as the sun, cut through the void. It tore through the lead Triumph warship, and in an instant the enormous vessel disintegrated, its pieces scattering like debris in a storm. The Triumph fleet's shields flickered, then went dark. They couldn't understand it. The Dominion wasn't supposed to have that kind of firepower. None of Earth's ships were supposed to be this strong. Before the Triumph fleet could react, humanity's warships descended upon them. Plasma bolts lit up the dark void, streaking through the cold emptiness like burning stars. Triumph ships erupted in showers of sparks and fire, their massive forms crumbling as if they were made of paper. Railguns roared, tearing through the Triumph ships with precision that sent shockwaves through space. Admiral Harrow watched from the bridge of the Dominion, his hand clenched into a fist. This was it, the moment humanity had been preparing for. No more hiding, no more playing fair. The Triumph were not just an enemy, they were the embodiment of everything the humans had fought against. The humans had endured, survived, and now they were showing the galaxy exactly what they could do. "We're taking the fight to them," Harrow said, his voice sharp and commanding. The battle raged on, the Triumph fleet struggling to keep up. Their ships were powerful, but they were sluggish, their weapons unable to keep up with the speed and precision of the humans. The Dominion alone had turned the tide, but it wasn't the only weapon humanity had. Smaller human ships, built for speed and agility, darted in and out of the enemy lines, picking off the Triumph warships one by one. Each explosion that rocked the Triumph fleet was another reminder. Humanity was no longer weak. They had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had arrived. On the surface of Earth's moon, the planet's defense systems sprang to life. Massive planetary cannons, hidden beneath layers of rock and ice, unleashed their firepower, adding to the chaos of the battle. The Triumph never expected this level of coordination. Their ships had been designed to withstand conventional attacks, but this was unlike anything they had ever seen. The first of the Triumph flagship ships fell, its once-proud form collapsing into a cloud of shattered metal. The remaining Triumph warships, now disoriented and on the run, tried to flee, but it was too late. The humans had already proven their might. Admiral Harrow's voice echoed across the fleet. "We've only just begun." The Triumph fleet, once so massive and untouchable, was now in full retreat. In less than a day, humanity had destroyed the might of one of the oldest empires in the galaxy. The survivors fled, their once-proud fleet reduced to a fraction of its original strength. And as they fled, they knew something that the rest of the galaxy was just beginning to realize. Humanity was no longer a small, insignificant species. The galaxy had underestimated them, and that was a mistake that would haunt everyone who had dared to dismiss the human race. On the bridge of the Dominion, Admiral Harrow watched the retreating Triumph ships vanish into the void. His face remained calm, but inside he knew the truth. The warning had been issued, and now humanity would show the galaxy just how dangerous they could be. The universe had been given a glimpse of Earth's power, and it was a force that would not be stopped. The galaxy was on notice, and it was only just beginning to understand the full weight of humanity's might. The galaxy was still reeling from the devastating defeat of the Triumph Collective. For centuries, the Triumph had stood at the top, their warships towering over any who dared challenge them. But humanity had shown them that power alone wasn't enough to survive the brutal force of Earth's military might. The galaxy's mighty empires were beginning to understand. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Despite the shock and fear rippling through the stars, the Zenari, an intelligent and proud species, believed they could change the course of things. The Zenari were diplomats by nature, often serving as intermediaries between other species, but they were no strangers to the arts of war. They were cunning and strategic, and their reputation for negotiation was unmatched. They had heard the warning from Earth, but like many others, they believed that they could reach a peaceful resolution before things escalated any further. They had dealt with the Triumph before. Surely they could find a way to reason with the humans. But they were wrong. The Zenari Council had sent emissaries to Earth, believing that a diplomatic approach would be enough to calm tensions. They even offered a treaty of peace, one that would allow the Zenari to mediate between humanity and the other powers of the galaxy. They believed humanity's aggressive actions were born of fear and misunderstanding. If only they could reach out with words, the conflict could be avoided. What the Zenari didn't understand was that humanity had already made its decision. The time for talks was over. Admiral Thomas Harrow, standing on the bridge of the Dominion, received the Zenari emissary's offer. He read the transmission carefully, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his face, no frustration, just an overwhelming sense of resolve. "We didn't come this far to sit at the table with those who tried to wipe us out," Harrow said, his voice low but firm. "We came to show them that we're not afraid." The decision was made. The Zenari fleet arrived in Earth system with their usual grace. They were known for their sleek ships, built for precision and speed, with advanced communication technology and a reputation for swift strikes. They arrived in the outer rim of Earth's territory, a small fleet compared to the Trium or the Vorkari, but enough to send a clear message. The Zenari wanted peace. Admiral Harrow watched as their ships approached from his command chair. His hand tightened around the armrest, his mind calculating every possible move. He didn't want to fight the Zenari. They weren't like the Vorkari, a race driven purely by conquest and destruction. But humanity had been pushed to this point. The galaxy had given them no choice. "We gave them a chance," Harrow said softly, almost to himself. "Now we show them who we really are." He nodded and the signal was sent. Humanity's fleet, smaller but far more lethal than anything the Zenari could have imagined, moved into position. As the Zenari ships made their approach, the Dominion and the rest of the human fleet remained motionless, waiting. The Zenari made contact, sending a polite message to Earth's command, their leader's voice soft but urgent. "Admiral Harrow, we come in peace. Let us discuss terms so that the horrors of war may be avoided." But the message was met with silence. The humans were no longer interested in words. They had already been shown the horrors of war, and now they were ready to show the galaxy what true terror looked like. Without warning, the Dominion and its fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower. Plasma cannons lit up the darkness of space, slamming into the lead Zenari ship with the force of a collapsing star. The Zenari, shocked by the sudden violence, scrambled to retaliate, but they were too slow. The human ships were faster, their movements calculated and precise, tearing into the Zenari fleet with ruthless efficiency. The Zenari ships were beautiful in their design, built for elegance and swiftness, but they were no match for the raw firepower humanity had developed. A dozen Zenari vessels were torn apart in seconds, their glowing, sleek hulls splintering and shattering into jagged pieces. Amidst the chaos, the humans pushed forward. The Dominion moved with the grace of a predator in a storm, sending wave after wave of energy into the Zenari lines. Every strike landed true, every attack left nothing but debris behind. The Zenari fleet, once so proud, was being obliterated before they could even put up a proper defense. In the heart of the battle, Commander Alina Pierce stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, a smaller but equally deadly ship. Her eyes flicked over the tactical map, taking in the movements of the Zenari ships. She had fought in countless battles, but this was different. The Zenari weren't the enemy they'd expected. They weren't the Vorkari or the Trium. They weren't the ones who would push back. No, the Zenari were like them once, long ago. A species who thought they could make peace in a galaxy of fire. Her orders were simple: wipe them out and make sure they never forgot who they were up against. "Engage," Commander Pierce ordered, her voice cold as steel. The Vigilance moved into position, cutting through the Zenari fleet with surgical precision. Railguns fired, each shot a devastating impact that sent entire ships spiraling into the blackness of space. For every Zenari ship destroyed, another followed, the fleet unraveling under the relentless barrage. The Zenari leaders, watching the destruction unfold from their flagship, realized too late that they had miscalculated. They had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had assumed that the humans would back down, that their warning was just an empty threat. But it was. Humanity had spoken, and now it was time for the galaxy to listen. Why are you doing this?" the Zenari commander asked, his voice filled with disbelief. But no answer came. The humans had already made their decision. The Vigilance continued its assault, its weapons never faltering, never pausing. In less than an hour, the Zenari fleet was no more. The remnants of their ships drifted in space, nothing more than broken fragments of what had once been a proud armada. The humans had done what they said they would. They had shown the galaxy that their warning was not a bluff. The Zenari, once so confident that they could resolve this with words, now lay defeated, crushed by the overwhelming power of Earth's military. Admiral Harrow stood on the bridge of the Dominion, his eyes scanning the stars. The Zenari's destruction had been swift, but the cost was high. Humanity had just made an enemy of another powerful species, but there was no regret in his heart. There was no turning back. "Let the galaxy know," he said quietly, his voice heavy with determination. "We are not to be ignored, we are not to be underestimated." The message was clear. Humanity had drawn its line in the sand, and they would no longer tolerate threats. There would be no more peace talks. There would be no more chances. The galaxy had learned the hard way. And it wasn't done yet. The universe had just begun to understand the full measure of humanity's strength. The warning had been issued, and now the price would be paid. The galaxy had been given its wake-up call. The Zenari had fallen, the Triumph had been shattered, and now word spread fast. There was a new power in the galaxy, and it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Humanity had warned them, and they had ignored it. Now there would be no more mistakes. But the most powerful empires in the universe weren't going to back down so easily. Even after the swift and brutal defeat of the Zenari, the other species watched cautiously, waiting for the next move. Would humanity be content to sit back after such victories? Or would they push forward, determined to prove that they were not just a fleeting power, but a force capable of reshaping the stars? The answer came in the form of the biggest challenge yet: the massive, intimidating fleet of the Xanth Dominion, a ruthless, technologically advanced species that had been watching Earth's rise with growing concern. The Xanth were a warrior race, known for their cold, calculating tactics and their ability to destroy entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. They had seen the destruction of the Triumph and the Zenari, but they believed themselves to be untouchable. They were the last major force, standing in the way of humanity's total dominance. The Xanth Dominion had no intention of letting a young, rebellious species disrupt the balance of power in the galaxy. They believed they could crush humanity with overwhelming force. The Triumph and Zenari had been mere setbacks, they thought. They would deal with Earth swiftly, without hesitation, and restore their place as the galaxy's supreme empire. Their fleet was vast, larger than anything humanity had faced before. Thousands of ships, each armed with weapons that could obliterate entire fleets with a single shot. It was the largest gathering of military might the galaxy had ever seen, and it was heading straight for Earth. Admiral Harrow watched the incoming Xanth fleet from the bridge of the Dominion. His face was grim but resolute. Humanity had come too far to back down now. "They think they can scare us," Harrow muttered, staring out at the advancing enemy. "They think they can intimidate us into submission." The Dominion shook slightly as the final adjustments were made to the ship's weaponry. Harrow looked to his officers, his voice steady but hard. "We've come this far. There is no turning back now. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." The human fleet assembled in perfect formation, ready for battle. Unlike the Xanth, who used brute force to control the battlefield, humanity's strength lay in strategy, precision, and speed. The humans had learned from every battle they fought, had adapted and evolved. They were no longer the weak, frightened species the galaxy had once dismissed. They were the force that could shatter even the greatest empires. The first strike came from the Xanth. A barrage of plasma fire lit up the space between their fleet and humanity. The weapons were powerful, designed to rip through any defense that stood in their way. But the humans were ready. "Brace for impact," Commander Alina Pierce shouted over the roar of the ship's engines, her voice calm but commanding. The Vigilance shook as it absorbed the first few hits, but the shields held firm. Earth's technology had advanced in ways the Xanth could never have anticipated. Their weapons, once seen as unbeatable, were now just another obstacle to be overcome. "Return fire," Harrow ordered, his voice cold as ice. "Make them regret ever thinking they could challenge us." Humanity's counterattack came fast and hard. Railguns fired with devastating force, cutting through the Xanth fleet like a knife through butter. Plasma missiles followed, turning enemy ships into burning wrecks. The Xanth fleet faltered as it was hit from all sides, their massive ships collapsing under the relentless barrage. But the Xanth were not without their own strength. Their fleet retaliated, launching a second wave of attack. The space around Earth was filled with explosions and the glowing trails of energy blasts, each one a reminder of how high the stakes had become. Harrow's hands gripped the controls tighter. The Dominion fired again, its weapons glowing with power. The Xanth warships fell one by one, but they were relentless. More ships came, more weapons fired, and soon the sky around Earth was filled with the wreckage of the deadliest battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. "We can't let up," Harrow said, his eyes fixed on the enemy fleet. "We'll show them that humanity does not break." The battle waged on for hours. The Xanth, despite their overwhelming numbers, were being pushed back. Humanity's tactics were flawless, never giving the enemy a moment's peace, never allowing them to regroup. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of technology had been honed for this moment. The humans were no longer outmatched. At the heart of the chaos, Commander Pierce led the Vigilance into the fray. She was everywhere at once, on the battlefield, in the thick of it, pushing her crew to fight harder, to hit harder. The Xanth were being worn down, their once immense fleet now a broken shell of its former self. "We've got them on the ropes," Pierce said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the battle. But then, just as victory seemed certain, the unthinkable happened. The Xanth unleashed their final weapon, the Titan-class battleship. A gargantuan warship the size of a small moon, it was an unstoppable force, built to obliterate entire fleets in a single sweep. The Titan moved slowly, its weapons charging, ready to devastate everything in its path. For the first time in the battle, the human fleet hesitated. The sheer size and power of the ship were enough to make even the bravest of soldiers pause. "This is it," Harrow said, his voice filled with grim determination. "This is where we end it." The Dominion locked onto the Titan, its massive cannons firing with everything it had. But the Xanth ship was shielded by a technology that even the humans had never faced. The blasts merely skimmed off its surface, doing little more than scratching the hull. "We're not done yet," Harrow said through clenched teeth. "Everyone focus fire on that ship. We will not stop until it's nothing but dust." The human fleet shifted tactics in an instant. The smaller ships darted in and out of the Titan's range, distracting it long enough for the Dominion and the Vigilance to find weak points. The Xanth ship, with all its power and might, was not invulnerable. The humans had learned how to exploit its defenses, and slowly, piece by piece, they chipped away at the Titan's armor. Finally, after hours of grueling combat, the Titan fell. Its shields collapsed, its engines exploded in a flash of light, and the mighty warship was reduced to nothing more than a smoldering wreck in the vastness of space. The Xanth fleet, without their ultimate weapon, was no longer a threat. The remaining ships fled, their confidence shattered, their pride broken. Admiral Harrow's voice rang out across the fleet once more. "This is humanity's reckoning," he said, his tone unwavering. "We are no longer a species to be ignored. The galaxy will fear us." The humans had done it. Against overwhelming odds, they had defeated the Xanth Dominion, a power that once seemed unstoppable. And with it, humanity had sent a message that would echo across the stars for centuries to come. No one, no empire, no species was safe from the fury of Earth. Humanity had arrived, and they would not be turned away. The galaxy was trembling. Humanity's victory over the Xanth Dominion had sent shockwaves through every corner of the universe. The once mighty empire that had thought itself untouchable was now broken and retreating. But as the dust settled from the most brutal battle in galactic history, another truth emerged. Humanity's real strength wasn't just in their weapons or their technology, it was in their people. The galaxy had only seen a glimpse of what Earth could do when provoked. Now, the full weight of human resolve was about to unfold. On the surface of Rigel 7, a new colony just on the edge of human space, the first ground assault in the new war against the remaining alien empires had begun. The Bilakians, a cruel, war-hungry species that had long terrorized the smaller colonies in this sector, had decided to test humanity's resolve. Their fleet had been decimated by Earth's warships, but they still held power on the ground. The Bilakians were large and terrifying. Their brute strength and endless thirst for violence had made them the scourge of the galaxy. Rigel 7, Earth's latest settlement, had been meant to be a peaceful outpost. But when the Bilakians arrived, they brought their bloodlust with them. They quickly seized control of the colony's central city and set up a makeshift base, determined to use it as a staging ground for further conquests. But humanity would not be cowed. Sergeant Sarah O'Connor, a decorated hero from Earth's Special Forces, was among the first to be called into action. She stood tall, her dark eyes locked on the horizon where the Bilakian stronghold could be seen in the distance. The wind whistled past her helmet, carrying the dust of a once pristine world. This was no longer just a battle for a colony. It was a battle for Earth's honor, a battle to show the galaxy that humanity would never back down. She tightened her grip on the plasma rifle slung across her back and checked her equipment. The mission was simple: infiltrate the Bilakian base, eliminate their command structure, and liberate the colony. But nothing about this mission would be simple. "All right, squad," O'Connor said, her voice calm but commanding. "We're going in, no mistakes, no mercy." Her team, a mix of seasoned soldiers and newer recruits, nodded in agreement. Each one knew the stakes. The galaxy had watched humanity destroy the might of the Trium, the Zenari, and the Xanth. But it was here on the ground that humanity would truly prove what it meant to be the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The night before the assault, O'Connor gathered her squad around a small fire. The flickering flames cast long shadows, their faces hard with the weight of what was about to come. "We're not just fighting for this colony," she said, her voice low and steady. "We're fighting for Earth, every single one of us. When we win this, the galaxy will see what we're really capable of." Her words weren't just for the squad, they were for herself. She had been in countless battles, had seen death face to face, but this one felt different. This was a turning point. The Bilakians had underestimated humanity's resolve just as so many others had before them. They thought they could break them. They were wrong. At dawn, the assault began. The first wave of soldiers, equipped with exosuits and plasma rifles, stormed the Bilakian perimeter, catching the enemy off guard. The Bilakians were quick to retaliate, their war machines and heavy weapons spewing fire. But the humans were faster, smarter, and more brutal than anything the Bilakians had ever encountered. O'Connor led the charge, her squad following close behind. She was a whirlwind of destruction, her rifle never still as she cut down Bilakian soldiers one after another. The Bilakians, though fierce and massive, were not prepared for the speed and precision of the humans. The human soldiers moved with a deadly grace, anticipating every move, exploiting every weakness. The Bilakians were strong, but they were not fast, and they were certainly not as smart as the humans. "Push forward," O'Connor yelled over the comms, her voice ringing with authority. "We take that base or we don't leave this planet." The team moved like a single entity, attacking the Bilakian stronghold with surgical precision. Every doorway they breached, every corridor they cleared was a testament to their training. The Bilakian resistance grew fiercer with each step, but the humans never faltered. Inside the base, O'Connor encountered the Bilakian leader, Zeroth, a towering brute covered in scars from countless battles. His eyes burned with hatred as he charged toward her, his massive sword raised high. But O'Connor was ready. She ducked under the blade, moving like lightning, and fired a shot into Zeroth's chest. He staggered back, surprised by the speed of her attack before finally collapsing to the ground. With their leader dead, the Bilakians' morale shattered. The rest of their forces crumbled as O'Connor's squad swept through the base, taking out any remaining pockets of resistance. It was a brutal, bloody fight, but it was over quickly. The Bilakian presence on Rigel 7 was wiped out, and the colony was free. As O'Connor and her squad stood in the wreckage of the Bilakian base, the stars above them seemed quieter than ever before. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just some weak species hopping to survive. They were a force to be reckoned with. "We did it," one of her soldiers said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. But O'Connor wasn't listening. Her mind was already racing ahead. The Bilakians were defeated, but there were more enemies out there. More who had underestimated humanity and would have to be shown the same lesson. "We're just getting started," O'Connor said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "The galaxy has no idea what it's up against." Back on Earth, the victory at Rigel 7 was broadcast across the stars, a shining example of what humanity had become. The galaxy, once filled with ancient powers and impenetrable empires, was now facing something entirely new, something dangerous. Humanity's rise wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of strength, of resilience, of never backing down when the odds were stacked against them. The message was clear. Humanity had not come this far to be pushed aside. The galaxy would learn to respect them, or it would face their wrath. And Earth was just getting started. The war had only just begun. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity was no longer just a nuisance. The victory at Rigel 7 was the final message that the galaxy could not ignore. Every species, from the mightiest empires to the smallest colonies, had seen what humanity was capable of. And now they were all afraid. The once untouchable empire of the Trium, the feared Vorkari dominion, and even the ancient Zenari had all felt the sting of humanity's wrath. But in the aftermath of each battle, one question echoed through the halls of power across the galaxy. What would humanity do next? Admiral Thomas Harrow stood at the command center of the Dominion, staring out at the dark expanse of space. The stars had never seemed more distant. Humanity had proven their might time and time again, but the universe was vast, and many enemies still remained. The warships, once thought of as humanity's only strength, were now symbols of their power, but Harrow knew they could not rely on their ships alone. They needed more. It wasn't just about winning battles anymore. It was about setting the tone for the entire galaxy. "We need to send a clear message," Harrow said, his voice grim. "We're not just a threat in battle, we're a force that will reshape the galaxy, and they will respect us." His officers nodded, understanding the weight of his words. But one thought lingered in Harrow's mind. Would the galaxy ever truly respect them? Or would humanity forever be a reminder of how dangerous a species could be when pushed too far? The decision was made. The humans would strike first, not in defense, but as a show of force. The next step was the most crucial. The Imperium, a race of tyrannical conquerors who had controlled vast swaths of the galaxy for millennia. They had heard of humanity's rise, but they had laughed it off. To them, Earth was still a weak, young species that would be crushed under the might of the Imperium's legions. The Imperium's fleet, massive and overwhelming, set course for Earth space. Thousands of warships, capable of laying waste to entire systems, were prepared to make an example of humanity. But Earth was ready. As the Imperium fleet approached, the Dominion and its sister ships silently positioned themselves, hidden by the dark void of space. The humans had learned from every battle, from every defeat, and they had prepared for this moment, for this very enemy. "We'll hit them first," Harrow said, a fire burning in his eyes. "Hard and fast." The Imperium ships came into view, massive, ominous, and bristling with weapons. They expected the humans to cower, to flee as they had done with every other empire that came before them. But they were wrong. Without warning, humanity struck. The Dominion led the charge, firing its main weapons with unrelenting force. The massive energy beams lit up the darkness of space, slamming into the Imperium ships with such force that entire sections of their vessels erupted into fire. The Imperium, caught off guard, immediately retaliated. Plasma cannons erupted, and their warships fired everything they had. But the humans didn't falter. Their ships moved with precision, each strike calculated, each movement deliberate. The Vigilance and the other human warships attacked the flanks, tearing through the Imperium's lines with surgical precision. The first wave of Imperium warships buckled under the onslaught, their shields failing within moments. The humans were faster, more unpredictable, and they hit harder than anyone could have imagined. "This is not how it was supposed to go," a voice from the Imperium's flagship said, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. "They're outmaneuvering us." The Imperium had thought their technology was unmatched, that no one could challenge their might. But the humans were rewriting the rules. They had come to fight, not just to defend, but to win. And as the Imperium fleet crumbled, panic spread throughout their ranks. "Admiral, their main flagship is down," one of Harrow's officers said, his voice filled with awe. "The Imperium fleet is in full retreat." But Harrow didn't smile. He didn't feel the rush of victory that many of his crew had expected. There was no satisfaction in crushing an empire that had thought itself invincible. All he could feel was the weight of what this victory meant. The Imperium had been defeated, but that victory came with a price. As the Imperium's fleet retreated, the rest of the galaxy watched in silence. The Vorkari, the Zenari, and countless other species knew that humanity was no longer just a rising power. They were the power. The consequences of underestimating them were clear. But just as the galaxy began to breathe a sigh of relief, a new threat emerged. The Korvax, a species from beyond the known galaxy, had been watching humanity's rise from afar. Their ships were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, huge, alien, and terrifying. The Korvax had no interest in diplomacy. They saw humanity's victories as an invitation to war. The first human colonies outside of Earth's immediate system were on the Korvax's list of targets. Earth's space was now a battleground. Humanity had never faced an enemy like this, and the Korvax were determined to test the humans' resolve. The Dominion and its fleet moved to intercept. Harrow knew that this fight would be different. The Korvax didn't follow the rules of conventional warfare. They attacked in ways that didn't make sense, using weapons humanity had never even seen before. "We've faced worse," Harrow said, standing tall as he watched the Korvax fleet approach. "We're going to show them what happens when they challenge humanity." The battle with the Korvax was brutal. Their ships moved with unnatural speed, almost ghost-like in their ability to slip past human defenses. Their weapons were capable of distorting space, making it hard to aim and counterattack. The Dominion and its fleet were tested like never before, fighting on unfamiliar ground against an enemy that had no regard for conventional tactics. For hours, the battle raged. The Korvax were relentless, but humanity was more so. With every strike they took, the human fleet struck back, harder and faster. And in the end, it was humanity's resolve that won the day. The Dominion and its fleet delivered the final blow to the Korvax, destroying their flagship and sending the remaining forces into retreat. Exhausted, battle-worn, but victorious, Admiral Harrow stood before his crew. The war had cost them dearly. It had cost them lives, sacrifices, and unimaginable losses. But the message was clear: humanity would never be pushed aside again. "We've fought long and hard for this," Harrow said, his voice hoarse. "And now the galaxy knows we're not going anywhere. We are the future." The stars, once cold and indifferent, now seemed to whisper with a new understanding. The galaxy had trembled at humanity's rise, and now it would remember the cost of underestimating Earth. Humanity had become the galaxy's greatest force, and they would not be stopped. The galaxy was no longer the same. For centuries, empires had risen and fallen, but none had dared challenge the old order. The Trium, the Zenari, the Xanth, and the Imperium all had ruled the stars in their own ways, their strength unquestioned. But after humanity's meteoric rise, everything had changed. The stars no longer whispered of ancient powers. They now spoke of a new force, one that could no longer be ignored. Admiral Thomas Harrow stood on the bridge of the Dominion, staring out at the endless expanse of space. The battle for the galaxy was far from over, but the tide had irrevocably turned. Humanity had struck fear into the hearts of the greatest empires in the galaxy, and now those same empires were trembling. It had started as a simple warning. Earth had been patient. Humanity had held back, waiting for the galaxy to understand. But the stars had been too arrogant, too dismissive. And now Earth's warriors had made their mark, one battle at a time, until the galaxy knew that they would never be ignored again. "We've done it, Admiral," Commander Alina Pierce said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of triumph. "The Imperium fleet is finished. The Korvax are on the run. There's nothing left to stop us." Harrow didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still fixed on the dark void of space, where humanity's fleet had just finished annihilating the last of the Korvax. The battle had been fierce, more difficult than anything they'd faced before. But the human fleet had persevered, pushing forward with an intensity that no enemy could withstand. And now, with the Korvax retreating, it felt as though the galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for what humanity would do next. "What do we do now?" Pierce asked, her voice softer now. "Do we strike again, take the fight to the other empires?" Harrow turned, his face hard but resolute. "No, we've already proven our strength. Now it's time to send a message that will echo across the galaxy." He walked over to the comm station, activating the global broadcast system. The message was simple, but it was one that would change everything. He stared into the camera for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Then, with a voice that carried the weight of all humanity's recent victories, he spoke. "To the galaxy," Harrow began, his voice steady, unwavering. "We've fought, we've bled, and we've conquered, and now we make our final declaration. Humanity is not some passing species. We are the future of this galaxy, and we will not be ignored again." He paused, his eyes never leaving the camera. "We warned you. We told you we were holding back. Now we've shown you what happens when you test us. This is just the beginning. If any empire, any species, dares to challenge us again, they will learn what it truly means to face humanity." The words hung in the air like thunder. Harrow let the silence settle before continuing, his voice growing even more intense. "The age of underestimating Earth is over. No longer will we hide in the shadows, waiting for your approval. The galaxy will now bend to our will, and if you stand in our way, we will destroy you." It was a bold declaration, one that would no doubt send shockwaves across every corner of the galaxy. For centuries, the great powers had been the ones who held the stars in their grasp. Now, humanity had claimed its place at the table, and there was no turning back. As Harrow finished speaking, a ripple of energy seemed to course through the fleet. The crew aboard the Dominion stood in silence, their faces a mixture of pride and uncertainty. They had fought and bled to get here, but the road ahead was still uncertain. The galaxy had heard their words. Now it would respond. Moments later, the first message arrived. A communication from the Vorkari Dominion, a species that had been humbled by humanity's power. Their voice was cold, filled with a simmering resentment that had long been buried beneath their pride. "Admiral Harrow," the Vorkari ambassador said, his tone clipped, "you have proven your strength. You have destroyed our fleet, our empire's pride. But understand this, the Vorkari are not weak. We will rebuild, and next time you will not find us so easily defeated." The transmission ended abruptly, but Harrow felt no fear. He had known the Vorkari would respond in anger. They would not back down, but they were no longer the galaxy's biggest threat. That title now belonged to Earth. He turned to Pierce. "Get the fleet ready, we're not done yet." The message was clear. Humanity wasn't interested in alliances or diplomacy. They weren't here to negotiate. The galaxy had been given the chance to respect humanity, but now they would be made to fear it. The next few days were filled with tension. The fleets of various species gathered at the Galactic Council's summit, a final attempt to come to terms with humanity. The leaders of the Zenari, the Trium, and the other surviving empires were desperate to avoid another war. They knew that humanity was powerful, but they still underestimated how far the humans were willing to go. On the day of the summit, as the representatives of the galaxy's remaining powers took their seats, a quiet murmur swept through the hall. The humans were not there to negotiate. They were there to make one final statement. Admiral Harrow entered the council room, flanked by Commander Pierce and several other key members of humanity's military command. The room fell silent as they walked to the center, their presence commanding attention. Harrow's eyes scanned the room, noting the nervousness in the eyes of the alien leaders. He stepped forward, addressing the council with the same unwavering confidence he had shown in every battle. "The time for words is over," Harrow began. "Humanity has shown you our strength. We've proven that we are not to be underestimated. We will not sit in the shadows any longer. From this moment forward, the galaxy will either respect us or face the consequences." There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt in his words. The galaxy's powers had all heard the warning, and now they knew the truth. Humanity was no longer a young, inexperienced species. They were a force capable of reshaping the stars themselves. The council room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Some alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances, while others looked outright afraid. The galaxy had been rocked to its core by humanity's rise, and no one knew what to expect next. But one thing was clear: humanity had already won. For the first time, the stars felt quieter. The great powers of the galaxy had been shaken to their core. The human fleet, once just a handful of ships, was now a force that could stand against any empire, and the galaxy knew it. "We will not back down," Harrow said one final time, his voice ringing out like a promise. "This is humanity's galaxy now, and you will all learn to respect us." The final declaration had been made. And as the galaxy trembled in the wake of humanity's words, one thing was certain: Earth was no longer just another species among the stars. They were the galaxy's new power, and no one would ever forget it.